Thank you. So tonight's talk, Mother Oak, Medieval South East England and Lowland Wood-Pasture, is being given by Andy Margetts. And I'm going to give you an introduction to him, but can I just mention, Andy, that we've got, at the moment, we've got the view with your notes. So do you want to switch over to the presenter view?
Okay, sorry, one moment.
Perfect. Yep, that's great. We are going to record the session as Tony's just pressed the special button. I've just seen a message in the chat. So yes, the recording is going to get uploaded to our YouTube channel, and we'll let people know when it's available, and we'll send out a link. So yes, you will be able to catch up and to watch again. And also there's obviously a few people that couldn't make it this evening. Thanks, Tony, for explaining that. Okay, so Mother Oak, Medieval South East England and Lowland Wood-Pasture. Tonight's speaker, Andrew Margetts, is Project Manager of Post-Excavation Research at Archaeology South East. He teaches at the Institute of Archaeology, and he's very committed to public engagement, so we're really delighted that he's come along this evening to speak to us. He has extensive experience in the archaeology sector. He acts as editor, referee and book reviewer, and he was elected as a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries last year. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Maria, for that lovely introduction there. And thanks to everyone who's come along on such a beautiful sunny evening to listen to this talk. So I've kind of worked in archaeology for some 25 years now, and much of that time's been spent at Archaeology South East. And to me, the real benefit of working for that company has been that I've always been interested in the landscape that I'm from. During my time in the field, I was fortunate enough to excavate multiple medieval sites and to try and set these within their landscape context. Through this work and the research I've done, it became apparent to me what a fundamental influence animals and people's interaction with them has had in the shaping of our countryside. Today I'm going to explore medieval transhumance in the wooded landscapes of lowland southern England. We will see how the environment of English wood pasture had this codependent relationship with medieval people and animals. And once this relationship broke down, both the historic management regime and the environment that it supported went into decline. So at some point in our distant past, a community realised their grazing of livestock could be combined with the produce of trees. And this was a time when forests were being cleared, and it became necessary to find a balance, one that reconciled the needs of grazing animals whilst allowing the regrowth of vegetation. Now, the origins of the practices I'm going to discuss today probably lie in the depths of prehistory. But these beginnings have often been elusive. Only with the development of isotope analysis and other modern scientific techniques are we now better positioned to begin to examine the birth of transhumance and wood pasture exploitation. Now, despite the potential for prehistoric grazing in open woods and evidence of Roman practices linked to pastoral woodland exploitation, it is the medieval period when we can be sure that the environment of wood pasture became widespread at a European scale. Here we can see the distribution of wood pasture habitats in Western Europe, and this is taken from a survey of wood pasture conducted for the European Union. We can see that the largest areas devoted to wood pasture currently exist in Spain and Portugal in an area known as the Iberian Dehesa. There is a good deal in France, Sardinia and Corsica, and parts of Romania and Greece. Now in Britain, by contrast, this 2015 Lucas database showed that just 3% of UK territory was given over to wood pasture, a probable fraction of the historic extent of the ecosystem. Here there are concentrations in the frith landscapes that fringe upland Wales, in northeast Scotland, and there are remnants in southern England. Now, thankfully, things are changing. Wood pasture has become highly valued for its biodiversity benefits, particularly for species directly or indirectly reliant on dead or dying wood. With a drive for nature recovery, there has been modern creation and restoration of wood pasture. Nevertheless, the most biodiverse wood pastures are ancient. In the UK, established wood pastures often have a biocultural heritage stretching back at least as far as the Middle Ages. And due to a lack of pesticides, they are a haven for rare insects, plants and fungi. In many ways, they have acted as a refugia for species that would have been common during the medieval period. As well as their ecological importance, these sites have significant cultural and landscape value. In southern England, this heritage began by the early medieval period when people and animals moved to the wooded commons on a seasonal basis. I'm going to try and explore the relationship between transhumance and the environment in the areas where the bioculture of English wood pasture continues to be strong. That is in the New Forest, the Weald and the region surrounding London. The Anglo-Saxon Weald has often been thought of as this vast, impenetrable forest. Although it was certainly an overwhelmingly wooded area, its story is one of increasing clearance and colonisation as the medieval period progressed. During the Middle Ages, it was probably at its most wooded during the 5th and 6th centuries, but even then it would have contained mosaic habitats of more open areas of land, wood pasture and closed woodland. We can tell this from the place names of the region. Woodland names are common, but there are also elements such as feld, denoting open country, lea, a pastoral clearing in a wood, and ersh names such as birch and ersh. The latter indicate ploughed fields, and in the case of birch and ersh, one that have become overgrown with that well-known coloniser species, birch trees. I always like to think of this name as a recognition by early medieval people of previous agricultural land that had become neglected. Whether that agricultural land was farmed in the Roman or Anglo-Saxon period, it's hard to tell. The area first existed as common pasture for the kingdom as a whole. Later, territorial links, represented here by the arrows, became more fixed. There was appropriation of pasture, firstly by so-called folk groups and later by Anglo-Saxon estates. The head settlements of these estates lay in the southeast's easier to work soils, areas that have become cleared of trees in prehistory and where the raising of an arable crop was more predictable. The outlying pastures lay on poorer soils and in the higher country of the Weald. During the 10th and 11th centuries, use of certain areas became institutionalised into closed, seasonal pastures, sometimes known as dens. So if you imagine the first circle here is the Weald during the early Anglo-Saxon period, this was a time when the area was intercommunable by the kingdom as a whole. The only areas excluded from communal use of the forest belonged to the kings. By the Middle Anglo-Saxon period, parts of the Weald became associated with folk groups through this sort of process of customary usage. Later still, specific pastures became appropriated by estates and ultimately manors. These seasonal pastures were often termed dens, wicks and folds. And the dens have most often been associated with the early medieval husbandry of swine. In the autumn and early winter, herders would use drove roads to take their pigs to wood pasture to be fed on acorns, beech nuts and other mast. On the other hand, the wicks and folds of the Weald appear to be related to the cattle economy and other livestock types. Swine pannage meant both the pasturing itself and the dues paid by tenants and others for the right to send their pigs to graze. It involved the autumnal feeding of swine in order to fatten them for slaughter. This detached pannage system was a means of risk spreading and maximising resources. It was an effective way of employing underutilised areas while separating livestock from the community's cornland. Pigs would have been costly and in many ways detrimental to keep on the home settlements all year round. And modern science has illustrated the benefits of the mast diet, that's these beech nuts, acorns and other woodland forage, to pork in terms of its flavour and fat content. I like to think of the fabulous qualities of the ham on Iberico. The famous black pigs and acorn diet are shown here in a visit of mine to the Spanish Dehesa. Now, as intimated earlier, wood pasture was also utilised for the grazing of cattle. The benefits of pig and cattle grazing in woodlands is well known, swine effectively clearing up the acorn crop so poisonous to cattle. This practice is still commonly associated with the New Forest today. Cattle can extract a considerable amount of fodder from browse, and it is likely that unimproved medieval animals could make even more use of poor quality feed. It was this combined feeding of cattle and swine that was essential to the creation and maintenance of wood pasture. So the rooting activities of pigs can loosen the soil, and it creates ideal germination conditions for saplings. It's shown benefits in terms of their impact on the biology of the forest floor. Their aeration of soil can speed up the release of nutrients to certain plants, and they can also break through the mats of grass and bracken rhizomes that form in some woods. Although grazing of pigs may be beneficial for these open wood pasture environments, when grazed in large numbers, they can ultimately cause the disappearance of woodland. So obviously, numbers need to be adjusted to the size of the available wood. The benefits of cattle to woodland ecology largely revolves around their large size and the fact that they can eat this broad spectrum of plant material. They cause structural diversity in woodland through their movement, grazing and trampling. This disturbance that they cause can expose mineral soils, grit and insects to the benefit of other woodland species, and their heavy feet push seeds down into the soil, and their browsing can create these beneficial glades. Their dung is attractive to fly and beetle larvae, which again can provide food for other animals and birds. Thanks to livestock grazing, wood pasture habitats comprise a vegetation structure rather than a particular plant community. Their form and species composition differs depending on underlying environmental factors such as geology and climate, as well as the type of grazing animals present and the stocking density of these animals in relation to the available land. Typically, a wood pasture structure consists of large, open-grown or high forest trees of various densities, and these exist within a matrix of grazed grassland or heathland and woodland. Long-established traditions of grazing allows the survival of multiple generations of trees, and wood pasture habitats typically include at least some veteran trees. These may comprise enormous open-grown examples, such as one of my favourite trees, the sun oak in St Leonard's Forest in the Weald. And the fact that these open trees are not surrounded by woodland means that they lack competition for sunlight and water, helping them achieve this huge size. They can also comprise pollards, such as these ancient examples at Burnham Beeches. Pollarding is, of course, a pruning technique that involves removal of a tree's upper branches to promote the growth of a dense head of foliage. Like coppicing, which is, of course, another woodland management technique that involves cutting trees down to a stump to encourage new shoots to grow, pollarding can increase the lifespan of trees, sometimes allowing them to live for many hundreds of years. The pollarding of trees within wood pasture produced roundwood and was designed to keep the shoots out of the reach of grazing animals. The shoots of pollards may also have been used as fodder or tree hay, particularly when there was a shortage of grazing or other stores of feed. It was also an insurance against failure of the hay crop due to cold, wet summers. Tree hay was cut during the summer and then dried to use as a supplementary winter fodder. People have used what is in effect experimental archaeology to recreate the method of making tree hay, and the practice is now fairly widespread amongst smallholders and those interested in agroforestry and sustainable farming. Now, some of these old trees, especially pollards, are the home of large plant and animal communities. Pollarding can promote the formation of tree hollows, which can benefit biodiversity. They're important for hole nesting birds, and bats roost in these hollow interiors. Peculiar lichens colonise old dry bark, and a host of invertebrates can call the trunk and canopy home. Now, these old trees, they're important as they contribute far more biodiversity than younger examples. In terms of the dominant trees, English wood pastures are often associated with oak and beech, although a wide range of other tree and shrub species may occur. You can tell woods that are pastured as they have a different structure to those that are not, often developing this distinctive browse line. You can see here that animals effectively graze out vegetation to a certain height at the limits of their reach. They're effectively removing the understory. But when walking through a wood pasture, you get a far greater sense of space and light than you would do in a normal woodland. You aren't impeded by brambles or saplings and shrubbery. Due to livestock's destructive quality, they are sometimes managed in ways that separate the grazing from the regrowth of trees. In general, most livestock like ash, elm and hazel, which are uncommon in wood pastures unless they are efficiently compartmentalised. Oak, beech, hornbeam and aspen do relatively well when exposed to browsing, either because they are left uneaten or because they can more readily recover. Hazel and lime, on the other hand, are rather susceptible to grazing pressure. The grazing of wood pastures means they are transitional habitats, with an ecology lying somewhere between woodland and grassland. The peculiar structure of wood pastures is most clearly demonstrated, I think, in the Spanish Dehesa. Here to the west of Madrid, the combined grazing of cattle and pigs, with the management of home and cork oak, has created an open, savanna-like environment, with the trees almost being devoid of an understory. But whilst not perhaps as dramatic as the Dehesa, English wood pastures share these browse lines and limited understory, the clearest example perhaps being the New Forest in Hampshire. Wood pastures such as the New Forest are generally sited on poorer soils. Due to seasonality in their usage and livestock providing the majority of grazing pressure, nutrients from dung and carcasses would be transferred out of the woodland, either when the grazing time ended or when the animals were sent to slaughter in their home settlements. And this can lead to further reductions in soil fertility. As carcasses were removed and not left to rot down, the environment lost that biomass which was locked up within the animals. In the periods when livestock weren't grazed, insects and plant life could no longer benefit from the dung that they generated. The result of seasonal grazing means that ground flora changes to some extent and begins to favour generally low-growing or unpalatable plants and those that can tolerate these low-nutrient soils. Many wood pastures are a mixture of rough grasses and herbaceous species such as sheep sorrel and tormentil, but the herbaceous species may be very bitten back. The vegetation depends on continued or intermittent grazing. When grazing ceases, trees of different species encroach, and the land becomes secondary woodland in just a few decades. What I'm trying to convey in this talk is that wood pastures are cultural landscapes created by the interplay of humans and animals with the environment. Because of their need for balance, wood pastures cannot be maintained by woodland or grassland management alone. The long-term sustainability of wood pastures is dependent on traditional multifunctional forms of land use that includes careful monitoring of the timing and the extent of grazing. Medieval communities achieved this by placing restrictions on herd sizes and limits on the months and lengths of grazing. Stints were the numerical limitation of grazing rights and was one of the primary methods of governing livestock numbers on common land in England. It was required to ensure a fit between the carrying capacity of the area of pasture and the numbers of livestock grazing it. Now, it might be an oversimplification to view the role of stinting as a model of sustainability, as it is also connected to the evolution of concepts of property rights, and the rules were often flouted by the community. Also, medieval people did not understand sustainability in the modern sense of the word, but they did recognise the need to sustainably manage their grazing reserves. The importance of English woodlands for the keeping of pigs is attested in the 11th century Domesday, when the size or amount of woodland on a holding came to be recorded in terms of the number of swine paid as an annual rent for the right of pasturage. Such and such a woodland was liable for so many pigs, for example. In terms of the length of the pannage season, most commentators agree that it ran between August and December. However, after the Norman conquest, an October to November date became the norm. As part of the medieval agricultural cycle, swine fattening en masse was so synonymous with autumn that it became the standard illustrated calendar depiction for either October-November or November-December. And these medieval pictorial representations of swine pannage are particularly helpful in illustrating the practicalities of the method of feeding pigs. Swine herds are shown beating trees to dislodge the nuts, shaking the trees, or climbing them to knock down the mast to foraging animals below. They are also helpful for showing the nature of the medieval pig. These were an unimproved, leggy and hairy type, one with long snouts, not dramatically different to wild boar. They were capable of being driven the 15 to 20 kilometres to the commons during this period of transhumance. It's probable that during the earliest phases of seasonal pig pasture, those lowest down the social scale were engaged with this yearly movement to the commons. Slaves comprised a significant body of agricultural labour during the early medieval period. 11th century documentary evidence indicates that a swine herd may either be an unfree afswain or a free but tribute-paying gaffelswain. Within the Sussex Weald, the association of bonded peasants with woodland pastures may be preserved in a place named Woolhurst, Wheelerhurst, wood of the Britons or serfs, although the compound of Dritton, a lord, and Gisel in Drigsel implies that those higher up the social scale were also engaged to some degree in transhumance practice. Drigsel meaning lord's hut buildings or the like. But the importance of seasonal swine pannage is also illustrated by excavated animal bone assemblages. In basic terms, the data shown here illustrates the relative consumption of the three major domesticates across southeast England for the early medieval period. The percentage of pig remains is above what would we consider normal nationally, and this is probably due to the importance of those weald and wood pastures for the keeping of swine. As well as in the documentary record and zooarchaeological remains, the seasonal movement to the commons left a legacy in the landscape. Firstly, this was reflected in place names and patterns of landholding. Here we can see those parent settlements in the better agricultural soils we discussed earlier, and their detached seasonal pastures, these woodland pastures in the weald. Notice how the place names connect the holdings. The people of Poling, for example, had access to outlying land at Powshuds, Pallingham, Pallinghurst and Pollingfold. To the left you have Upper and Lower Beeding, and in centre the people of Goring had access to Goring Lee. The yearly movement to the commons inscribed the landscape with routeways from these home settlements to the detached woodland pastures. Here in this satellite image of the Sussex Weald near Horsham, we can see an extensive network of parallel droveways. These medieval and earlier routes survive into the modern day as part of the road network, as green lanes, footpaths or long-distance field boundaries. Their parallel nature is really characteristic of areas that experience this yearly movement of people and animals. This line pattern of droveways seen here in this transect through Surrey and Sussex reconstructs the routes taken by early medieval herders to the woodland commons. Over time, these routeways developed into wide droves or really deep hollow ways, and these stretch from those permanent settlements to the detached pastures in the heart of the Weald. The destination of the droveways were the seasonal pastures, those dens, wicks and folds we learnt about earlier. And these often took on an arc shape or sub-oval form, testament to them being carved out of the earlier forest. Anglo-Saxon place names help identify these seasonal pastures, as well as the animals with which they were associated with. Cattle were included in place names such as Rotherfield, open land of the cattle, or Kema, the cow's mere. On screen is the location of Cowshot Manor on the heaths of the Bagshot series in the Thames Basin of Surrey. Cowshot is named Cushitzhagen in a surviving 7th century Anglo-Saxon charter. The name effectively means the cow enclosure. The enclosure can still be traced on historic maps, surrounded by open heath and areas of remnant wood pasture. At the Hayworth in West Sussex, we excavated a seasonal pasture and examined its environment. Here you can again see an oval enclosure bordered by an area of common. The site provided detailed pollen and environmental evidence for medieval creation of wood pasture. There was this interesting move over the 12th to 13th centuries to a partially cleared wooded environment. Here, beech, a tree that was not overly common in the medieval period, but was characteristic of wood pasture, replaced oak as the dominant woodland species. And this seems to have been the result of a progressive landscape change from the 7th century and suggests medieval development of early wooded environments into landscapes of wood pasture. Within other pastures, I've been also fortunate enough to excavate seasonal herders' huts. These buildings would have been small, timber-built examples measuring roughly 3 by 4 metres. They are likely to have been built of wattle door panels and to have had thatched or shingled roofs. They only had space for a bed, a hearth and a few belongings. They represent the Old English equivalents of sheilings found in stone-using upland environments. In Anglo-Saxon, they would have been termed gisels, skids, or skitas. We can learn much from these upland transhumance systems, as 1, they are better studied, and 2, the practices survived longer in the mountainous areas of the north and west of the UK, continuing in some areas right up until the late post-medieval period. Studies of historic transhumance have shown how different livestock types and the tasks that were embarked on involved different social groups or even whole communities. Herding could sometimes be a male preserve, whereas summering and dairying was often undertaken by groups of young women. Studies of transhumance in upland landscapes have evocatively imagined the physical and emotional journeys that people engaged in these practices may have experienced. They have demonstrated how the yearly movement to the commons could infuse the landscape with cultural memory. In these situations, the young could be free from close family control and enjoy one another's company, although they would have done so within the confines of broader proprietary, customary and social structures. Although we must be careful not to draw direct parallels from upland transhumance to the wooded landscapes of lowland southern England, it's likely that similar cultural experiences were achieved by those engaged in the movement to the wooded commons. Indeed, in those dwindling areas where woodland transhumance is still practiced on the continent, it's been shown to contribute to social inclusion, strengthening cultural identity and ties between families, communities and territories, while counteracting the effects of rural depopulation. It's also been shown to be beneficial for food and biodiversity conservation. In contrast to the continent, in England, the roots of woodland transhumance can be traced earlier, but it also died out earlier too. Through our excavations and historical evidence, we've been able to chart the decline of the southern English wood-pasture system. From its peak in the 10th and 11th centuries, the turning over of woodland areas to more permanent occupation led to a gradual decline in the historic system of seasonal land management. As the old seasonal pastures were granted to members of the community willing to carve a holding out of poorer soils, pannage, grazing rights and pastoral obligations were commuted, waived or restricted. Without the traditional forms of grazing exemplified by the medieval methods of transhumance, wood pasture went into decline. The symbiotic relationship between a wood pasture structure and its historic management regime broke down, leading to wood pastures becoming overgrown, converted into farmland or highly managed woodland. Although wood pasture can exist without transhumance, the medieval practices of exploiting woodland for seasonal pasture seen in southern England could not exist without wood pasture environments. Today, the immense benefits of wood pasture habitats has made them a target for conservation managers and ecologists. The environments have also shown potential for food production and feature prominently in the UK government's environmental land management scheme. The Elms, as it's known, will pay subsidies for wood pasture creation. Subsidies will also be paid for management and restoration of wood pasture. And there are also supplements available for grazing cattle in wood pastures. So clearly, wood pasture is once again going to be an important element of the English landscape, just as the dehesa continues to be in Spain today. Unlike English wood pasture, the dehesa has never lost recognition for its value. It's home to the Iberian lynx, wolves, genet and deer, as well as bird species such as black vulture, the golden eagle and kites. As well as its pastoral products, it provides wild game, mushrooms, honey, cork and firewood. Cork is harvested about every 9 to 12 years, depending on the productivity of the site. I hope you can see here how the outer bark is peeled from the trunk. This is a model of heritage and sustainability compared to the plastic corks often found in wine bottles today. In contrast to this continental example, in the UK, we are only now in the process of rediscovering the value of English wood pasture. Now, it can never be suggested that direct aping of medieval farming could solve modern environmental issues. But by studying past pastoral, arable or mixed regimes, we can position ourselves to inform future developments and take the best elements from past land use and apply them in suitable contexts. Historians and archaeologists can play a crucial role in the restoration of lowland wood pasture by providing insights into past land management practices and ecological conditions. Our ability to study and interpret the available evidence can reveal how wood pastures were managed, including the type of livestock grazed, the layout of enclosures, and the species of trees and plants that were present. Our evidence can help reconstruct the historic landscape, guide the reintroduction of native species, and the restoration of historic plant communities. By doing this, we can help preserve cultural heritage, local traditions, and community identities. In my opinion, conservation grazing and rewilding projects are in many ways echoing the medieval land uses that were fundamental to the creation of our countryside. As a case study, when we consider the conservation and grazing efforts of the Sussex Wildlife Trust at the Woodland site of Ebenow Common, here we might be able to demonstrate the combined opportunity to not only restore and enhance essential elements of the historic landscape, but also aid biodiversity and nature recovery. As I hope I've shown, the essential element of the historic landscape of the Weald is wood pasture. The historic decline of grazing at Ebenow meant that the wood pasture habitat became overgrown. When Sussex Wildlife Trust bought the reserve in 1980, there was a conscious effort to open up the woodland and restore grazing to the reserve. Restoring these landscapes also boosts community well-being, fostering a sense of identity and continuity. Community involvement in restoration projects can enhance social cohesion, creating opportunities for education, volunteer work, and connecting with nature. It's my belief that by embracing the lessons of the past, farmers and land managers will be able to respond to the challenges and the opportunities of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too as well, Andrew. That was just really fascinating.